Hello and welcome back, it's Lucy and Ellie from Roman Found, and today we are digging deeper into the history of our finds, travelling to England's northmost county, Northumberland.
So it's not just the metal finds that fill our bags on a dig. We often pick up a lot of field walking artefacts, and the vast majority of those are varying types of pottery.
We are on our way to visit potted history to see these ancient pots being made and to have a chat with the father and daughter team keeping ancient history alive through the medium of clay. Inside the studio, tucked away onto every shelf, is an ancient pot, sherd or potted history creation that represents such a rich wealth of history and archaeology that you can't help but be mesmerised by it all.
Graham and Sarah produce museum-quality vessels that embody the whole spirit of the ancient potters before them. Every part of their process is so authentic that they often have to create entire toolkits to produce the correct marks. Even their grit has a stamp of authenticity, and they say that if you are unlucky enough to break one of their creations, then it will even break like the original.
They produce pots for the British Museum, the Ashmolean, even the Detectorists Christmas special. I'm sure we all remember the Holy Grail.
There's a bucket over there of prehistoric tools, a Roman mortarium here that Graham uses to grind material down, Roman potter's wheels stacked up in the corner, splatters of green glaze, clay and slip coating almost every surface, and the brand new addition to this makerspace are Roman found jars, bags and boxes of pot shards that we've been obsessively harvesting from years of field walking over our permission.
So engrossed in our shared love of ancient pottery, we literally chat for hours over cups of tea examining our ancient fragments. But it's time to get into it and dig deep into the clay behind these ancient vessels.
So, Graham and Sarah, to start with, would you like to explain a little bit about just what potted history is and what it represents?
Potted history has grown out of the fact that I've been a working potter all my working life, and I've always been fascinated by the sort of idea of ancient technology coming to play in what I did. So what we do now is we create replicas of very ancient pots, going right back to the earliest. We try and replicate the technology as far as possible, everything from the methods and materials through hand tools through to reconstructing potter's wheels and building kilns and firing pots in the way they would have been fired originally. So it's sort of a combination of experimental archaeology and replication, I suppose, would be a summary of what we do.
Pottery has existed in Britain since Neolithic times, dating back 5,000 years, and archaeologically it has to be one of the most common and most useful finds when it comes to information. Pot shards can reveal almost anything from the dating of a site to what people were eating to even ancient economies showing evidence of trade. But it also provides a window into the people who made them, and that is something that Graham and Sarah found the most important in their work. In fact, you often mention having a handshake with these ancient potters through your work, so what is it that is normally revealed?
Quite often what happens is you're holding a piece in your hands and you can sort of feel your hand or your fingers sit into the place where a potter's fingers sat maybe as long ago as 5,000-6,000 years ago. And that's a very special feeling, but it's also about the fact that as you start to look at the pieces and as you start to try and replicate them, there are what are sort of described as Eureka moments where you suddenly go, right, I get it now, I understand exactly what's going on there. It is like a conversation between ourselves and the ancient potters about, how did you, oh right, okay, yeah, no, I've got that now. Yeah.
I always like that. It's kind of fun also, the idea that they kind of press their finger into that clay about, 4,000, 2,000, whatever, 1,000 years ago it was. And that moment is still there. That moment is forever saved. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, it is moments in time. I referred to it as frozen moments in time and then thought it's fired moments in time.
Yeah,
is what it is.
So from these moments in time and these vessels that remain, you can learn so much from the marks and touches of the ancient potters. But how important do you think they are to our understanding of the ancient world?
I think ceramic artifacts, one of the most important things about them, of course, is that they will survive in almost any ground conditions. So certainly with some of the earliest stuff, the Neolithic and going back to before the Neolithic, it is quite poorly fired and it does succumb to frost and things like that. But most archaeological sites, the ceramics will survive along with the stonework when maybe metalwork or organic artifacts haven't disappeared. So it's quite important in terms of it's often one of the only things we have left from some archaeological
And it's
sites.
often used to date. It's a more accurate method of dating than some of the other objects. Stone objects can't be dated and...
Yeah, ceramics was in fact used as a key to dating stuff before carbon dating came along. So it was one of the major ways of dating things. We do have carbon dating now, but we now also have things like residue analysis and thermoluminescence testing, where we can work out the last time something was fired, and there are all sorts of other techniques that come out of the pottery. So yeah, we've got with a lot of things that can happen there. But also pottery types and pottery making methods and things help to connect up often quite distant sites, so you can make links between trading sites and things by using the pottery.
Yeah, one of my favourite things is there's and I can't remember the exact vessels, but there's 2 vessels that were found in the UK, and they were Anglo-Saxon. One of them was from a pagan style burial practices, and one was from a Christian style burial practices. But a potter had made pots for the different burials, and I love that. I love the idea that the potters are not saying, "Oh no, you're Christian, I'm not making for you," or "You're pagan, I'm not making for you." But the pots that came from at least the same pottery family. Then the reason is that they have stamps that are identical on these 2 pots, but from totally different burials, and I like that. And I don't know how else you would find that unless you can identify the exact tool that was used on both pots.
We have brought several of our favourite Roman pot shards with us today, and Graham is going to be demonstrating to us shortly exactly how they would have been made. At Potted History, part of their mission is all about producing museum quality replicas that are easily accessible by the general public. So Graham, how important do you think this is?
I've spent a lot of time working demonstrating in museums and heritage sites around the country, and I'm well aware that what the general public do is they walk straight past all the broken pots, straight to the bling, the gold and the jewels and things like that. But for me, the gold and the jewels are the story of the wealthy, the story of the kings, queens, lords, all that sort of thing. And the pottery is the story of us, it's the story of ordinary people. And in it is recorded all sorts of information. So I've sort of made it my mission, if you like, over the years, to stop bits of broken pottery being boring. They're not. They're exciting. They tell stories. And I think that's what is important to us, that when we create a pot, we're not just trying to make it look like the original thing. We're trying to make it feel like it. We're trying to give some sort of understanding of how it might have been used, how it was created, and in some cases how it was broken, how it decomposed. So all of these things are possible by creating these replicas and allowing members of the public to handle them and to talk about them. And I think Sarah feels the same.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for a person to get enthusiastic about something they're not allowed to touch. And I think with gold and jewels, people have that acceptance because, they're such high value objects. But if you can't touch some of the everyday stuff, it just doesn't, I don't see how you're going to get that connection with it. And obviously we don't want people rummaging through actual pieces of pottery that are thousands of years old. So it's a way of creating that door for people to kind of access these objects and really understand how they're used through cooking and using them as they were intended, which is also very fun.
So is eating the food.
Yeah, so is eating the food. Although I must admit to not being that historically accurate there, but I'll cook something delicious in it. It might not be historically accurate.
If you're loving all the history in this episode, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow our channel.
One of my favourite types of pottery to find are fragments of Roman mortaria. In fact, I even found a piece on our latest dig. Mortarias are bowl-shaped vessels that were used for grinding herbs and spices in the preparation of recipes. They were only used in the Roman times, and more examples have been found here in Britain than in the rest of the empire. So let's see how one would have been made.
The Romans brought much of their food and cooking culture with them to Britain, including a wide array of cooking utensils and tools that includes the Roman mortaria. Roman mortarias have several important features that Graham is going to demonstrate for us by completing his already thrown mortaria. As these vessels were made for grinding, they often incorporated a pouring spout into their broad rims to aid in the removal of the ground material for use in recipes. To create the pouring spout, Graham first cuts the raised rim, which is then pushed outwards to create the channel for the spout. He then uses a slip and score technique to apply some excess clay to further complete the spout's form. Moulding the shape with his thumb and finger, this produces a high-walled pouring spout that flows outwards from the raised rim. But what makes a Roman mortaria so unique is that it has a coarse grit or iron slag embedded into its internal surface, known as a trituration grit. This grit was added through the use of a slip like Graham is demonstrating, and would have aided in the grinding function of the vessel as well as providing strength and reinforcement. The broad rims of a mortaria were made thick and heavy to create easy gripping and lifting, and often bore the potter's identification stamp. A lot of mortaria were produced for use within the Roman military, and there would have been trade routes of these vessels across the country. Trade routes that can be easily traced right now through the identifying potter's stamps that were often stamped into their broad rims.
Well, we know our favourite pottery era is Roman, and we are lucky enough to find quite a bit of it across our permission. But do you have a particular favourite era of potted history?
I always say the Bronze Age is probably my favourite time period, but often it's the Romans that pay the bills. So we do make a lot of Roman pottery, and we sell a lot of Roman pottery. But personally, I love making Bronze Age pieces, particularly beakers and food vessels, that sort of thing. But being entirely hand-formed, no potter's wheel, no molds or anything like that, they are very time-consuming and possibly not the most economically viable business-wise, but certainly the most enjoyable to explore. And of course, we both work a lot with archaeologists and archaeological sites where new things are being discovered. And to start to replicate something that's only just come out of the ground, first time anybody's seen it in sort of 4,000 or 5,000 years, it's quite something special.
The puzzle, it's finding it and then figuring out how to make it. And the puzzle is enjoyable.
Talking about favourites, you actually got to work on one of our favourite TV shows, producing the Holy Grail for the Detectorists Christmas special. What was it like working on such a piece that's become iconic in TV history?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, over the years, we've produced some amazing replicas for museums and heritage organisations around the world. But somehow being asked to make this piece for the Detectorists programme was very, very special. Apart from anything, I've always been a fan of Mackenzie Crook's work, and particularly the Detectorists. So when I got the phone call and they sort of explained what they wanted, immediate reaction was, wow, yeah, that's brilliant.
Although they didn't tell you it was the Grail, they told you the general theme of what they wanted, and you worked it out from there.
Yeah,
they were trying to be sneaky.
They were trying to be sneaky. They sort of said they wanted a small cup, fairly plain pottery, dated from about 30 AD, could have been made in Palestine, in what they described as the Herodian period. And I thought, I think I know what we're looking at here.
So Graham put the puzzle together of the Holy Grail even through the limited information he was allowed at the time. Putting together the puzzle pieces is something that Graham and Sarah do a lot within their work, having to work backwards from pot remains to determine techniques and methods of production. So let's see what they make of my favourite ever Roman greyware find. From the elaborate decoration and strong form to my favourite ever Roman greyware shard, Graham determined that it was likely to be from a Roman headpot, as it possessed similar decoration and construction techniques. Working out the diameter of the rim from the curvature of my shard, Graham gets ready to throw a headpot for us, one that he imagines my shard to have come from. So starting from just a lump of clay, Graham throws the huge vessel of a Roman headpot. These headpots were widely used throughout Roman Britain and are some of the most striking ceramic items produced during Roman rule and seem to have been a bit of a specialty of the Romano-British potters. They are believed to have been introduced by the Roman army, and they possess almost caricature-like features that are individually moulded onto their beautiful wheel-thrown jars.
Practically all of the tools that potted history use in their creation of these vessels have been handmade by themselves just as the ancients before them. But what has it been like learning and recreating these ancient tools and craft?
When I was a student, I was sort of well aware that what I was doing was working in a craft that went back thousands of years. And I was interested at that time to sort of know more about the ancient techniques and how I could bring them to bear into contemporary practice. So it's always been a thing of mine to try and explore the ancient technology, the ancient techniques. And of course, a lot of them are more direct, I suppose, than what we might use today. In other words, you're using your hands and you're using very basic tools, often natural materials, to do the work that these days is often done by a tool that was made by somebody else or a machine that'll do the job for you. It feels more in contact with the material. And I was sort of brought up into pottery as a time when honesty to materials was a big thing, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think, and it creates a more honest replica if you're using the actual tools. So it just kind of feels right. It's about getting it accurate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And authentic.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't get the right feel for the object, and without the right feel, you're not learning what we need to learn about how they were used.
Graham throws for us the huge jar that would have had its caricature head applied onto, but to create the strong decoration around the rim that my shard possesses, he has to use one of his handcrafted tools, a small wooden spoked wheel that, when held to the edge of the rim whilst the pot is spun, produces a rotatory pattern. A lot of this learning that you have both done has been through having such a hands-on approach. Like making your own tools and building your own kiln and working with Roman potters' wheels, you use making to understand and replicate the works of these ancient potters, which is a technique that you refer to as experimental archaeology. But how important is this in understanding the ancient world?
Experimental archaeology has definitely become a big thing now, and quite a few of the universities have started to put together experimental archaeology degree courses and beyond. And I think the reason for that is that in the past, and it's one of the things that got me started in what I do now, is that when I first started, I was looking for that information about ancient techniques, ancient technologies, and I would go quite naturally to archaeological journals and excavation reports and that sort of thing. And what I'd often find is that the archaeologists themselves in 1950s or whatever set about describing how things were made or how they were fired or the tools that we used. And so often I'd find myself sitting reading this going, no, that's wrong. So I would go off and I would try things out and I'd test my ideas. And all of a sudden I discover that what I'm doing is experimental archaeology, and I suppose when I first started doing it I didn't realise that's what I was doing. But what it does is it explains an awful lot, not only about the pots themselves, but often about the cultures that created those pots and other things that were going on around that. I think one of the things that you could cite, for instance, is the replica kiln that we've built at Vindolanda. Every time we fire that, we learn a little bit more. And we've learned a lot about how the Romans judged temperatures. They didn't have thermocouples, they didn't have electronic thermometers. We've learned a lot about the quantities of fuel used, because a lot of what had been written in archaeological journals before that was completely wrong. We've learned a lot about the types of fuel, the way the kiln was packed, the structure of the kiln itself, how you close it off, the atmospheres that you can create within there. And all of this has come from actually doing it, and you couldn't come on that information in any other way.
No, and there's all the other bits, because we now use some of the hot coals that we rake out of the kiln, we use them to cook with, because it just seems like a logical use of the fuel. These coals are not required for the firing, because you need the quick heat of fresh fuel. So you've got this kind of byproduct which allows you to cook very nice food, and the workers are going to have to eat. So it's all of this stuff. It's not just about the technology, it's also about the periphery, what might have been going on around, how much time did they have to stand and gossip, etc., etc. Which is quite a bit, actually, we'll find it.
Certainly with some of our volunteers. Yeah, and what I was going to say there is, of course, that when you go back to look at the reports on the sites, quite a lot of the kilns that have been excavated, somewhere near the fire mouth of the kiln, will be a little hollow scooped out into the bankside that has never often really been explained, and now we think
yeah, because I was having a conversation with an archaeologist last time we were there, and she said, there's this little bit, and I didn't know what it was. I wondered if it could be the hearth, and then she said, but having said that, it's a lot higher up than yours is. And I said, well, if I could have mine a lot higher up, I'd have mine a lot higher up, because it's bad for my back having to lean down and do this. So it's through that kind of conversation that we actually...
It's where the Roman kiln fire heated his pasty up. That's
exactly.
What it is.
Yeah. And it is very, the Clubanus that we have was very good at heating the pasties that we had at Vindolanda. Again, not very historically accurate, but very tasty.
Driving back through dusk, we never wanted to leave the Potted History studio, and can't thank both Graham and Sarah enough for allowing us to visit and spend such an enlightening day with them.
We both feel like we have a better appreciation and understanding for the pottery finds we pick up on our fields. We can't wait to get back out there and find our next shard.
So if you want to join us back in the field searching for all Roman finds from coins to pottery, then be sure to check out this video. Thanks for watching. If you're feeling inspired and want to get out digging, then we've got a 10% discount code off at LP Metal Detecting, so treat yourself to some new gear.
The link's in the description.